This project started at a pop-up shop. I went there specifically to meet the designer behind byVINNIK. I was wearing one of my beaded hats and watching her dress people in these grand, unique opera coats, and I was instantly enthralled. After the pop-up, she asked me if I wanted to bead one of her coats. Honestly, I've never been more scared. It wasn't my lack of faith in my skill, but these are high-end luxury pieces, and the stakes felt massive. I actually sat on the first coat for about 2 months before I could start. But when I ended up finishing the coat, it beaded the fear out of me, and everything changed. I visited her showroom in LA, and that's where the real collaboration really took off. We spoke, and she ended up giving me 6 more coats to work on. Because I enjoyed the first process so much, the weight of the jacquard, the depth of the colors, I wanted to explore more of what I could do with her specific prints. She gave me almost 5 pounds of fabric scraps to experiment with. Now that those 6 coats are finished, I'm moving into this new series, pairing those premium byVINNIK scraps with my own finds to create a complete look. These boots are the first iteration of that series. I found these suede boots at a pay by the pound. Now, let's be clear. These weren't some trashed, worn out boots. They were basically brand new. I even had to cut the tags out of them. But the reality of buying by the pound is that these items sit in massive industrial bins. By the time I got them, the suede had taken some hits. We're mostly talking surface nicks and long scuffs and areas where the texture was just knocked around. Originally, I didn't have a plan for these boots. They were just sitting on my shelf. It wasn't until I was in my studio sorting through fabrics, trying to pair specific prints with the hats that they were intended for, I pulled this specific pattern, and it was instantaneous when I looked at the print. The boots and the print just clicked. This wasn't meant for a project I'd have to force. It felt like they were meant to work together. When I looked at this print, it reminded me of how I test paint, those organic swipes of color. The negative space in the print was black, which matched the suede perfectly. I could immediately envision the complete fit, putting on a byVINNIK coat and looking down at these heels. The project ate about 150 hours. People ask why I can't just move faster, and it comes down to the design of the print. If I were doing a cheetah print, I could use long rows of beads to outline and fill the shape quickly, but this print was organic like paint strokes. If I used long rows here, it would look a little too geometric and it would strip out all the essence of the work. To match the fabric completely, I wanted to hand place every single bead one by one. Since I'm using loose beads, I'm dealing with placement rather than thread tension. I had to start in a section and then radiate out, maneuvering every bead while the glue was wet to make sure they sat flush. It's like doing a 150-hour puzzle. When I first got the shoes, the damage wasn't dramatic, but it was everywhere. There were all these tiny nicks scattered across the surface. At first, I honestly thought I might just leave it. I figured the wear could be part of the character, but as I started working through the shoe, I kept running into these moments where a damaged patch was so far off from the original print, it didn't make sense aesthetically to try and extend the print over it. It would have looked forced, so instead of fighting the print, I pivoted using black beads. The first time I tried it, I immediately liked how it looked. I had originally planned to introduce the other colors and create multiple tonal patches, but once I saw the black against the surface, I didn't want to overcomplicate it. I used a mix of matte and glossy beads, so it doesn't just cover the damage, it creates an extra layer of texture. What I love is that the bones of this object was already strong. The shoe itself didn't need rescuing, but for me, the beadwork has to complement the quality of the object it's sitting on. So instead of repairing the scrapes, I camouflage them. I turned cosmetic damage into intentional design. And the coolest part is that I didn't even plan this when I started. These were very specific shoes with very specific marks. This means this exact beadwork can never really be replicated. I could bead another pair, sure, but it would never look like this, and that makes it truly a one-of-one piece. It wasn't until I was 70% of the way through the shoe that I realized I needed to bead the interior of the heel. I kept looking at where the beadwork stopped, and something about it just felt unfinished. At first, I thought I would handle that interior with different fabric, and I considered a fabric spray so it wouldn't get dirty, just treating it as a practical surface instead of part of the design. But when I tested the spray, it darkened the fabric. The color shifted, and suddenly, it didn't match the energy of the rest of the shoe. The more I looked at it, the more obvious it became it wasn't cohesive. And honestly, once I had the realization, it wasn't even a dramatic decision. I was already deep in this process and already repairing nicks and scrapes, so I might as well keep continuing. And I had this moment where I thought, what's the point of doing all of this work and stopping at the interior of the heel? Technically, at around 80% completion, adding more work should feel exhausting, but it didn't. It felt like I was extending the project. It felt like I was catching up to where the design was actually supposed to be. For me, finishing unseen areas is about the craftsmanship. I always look at my work from the perspective of somebody who might purchase it. I know how much effort it takes to earn money, so if somebody chooses to spend that money on something I've created, I want them to feel like every inch of it was considered. Even a detail that's technically on the underside is still visible and still matters. Leaving that interior unfinished would have felt incomplete. Beading it made the shoe feel resolved. And I'm glad I made the pivot because now it doesn't just look decorated, it actually looks finished. This pair matters because it sets the tone for the series. The whole idea is taking existing objects and applying byVINNIK print to it and then beading it and elevating it into something that feels luxury while still honoring what it originally was. What I like about this pair specifically is that it forced me to respond to what was already there. The scrapes, the nicks, the flattened suede, those weren't part of a perfect blank canvas. They were constraints, and instead of fighting them, I built around them. Nothing about this process felt experimental in the sense that I was learning how to bead. I've spent hundreds of hours doing that already. What this project required was attention, consistency, and deciding that every visible surface deserved to be resolved. And that's what this pair represents for me. Not just embellishment, but completion. Taking something found and putting it to its highest, finest finish. This is the first iteration in what will become a larger body of work, and this is just the starting point. I'm excited to see how far I can take it.